This is some briefing material for the students in advanced macro policy modeling one. Okay. But I'm also going to use it as an opportunity to basically give a little bit of feedback, as well as to inform the students in the Global Forecasting School about some of the things that we're up to. So one of the things that's really fun is that we now have this two programmers actually, but one is developing a modeling system. And as part of this modeling system for the Global Forecasting School, there will also be a website where people can interact and share information. The Global Forecasting School students now will also have a part of that website open to the public and so on, or sorry, open to students and so on. Not It won't be totally open. You'll have to sign up and that sort of thing. But it will have access to various models and so on up until the point where you enter the Global Forecasting School, at which point that's as far as you will be able to go, unless you're a Global Forecasting School student. But one of the things that we're doing is developing. Some people might think of it as a performance management system, but when you think about it that way, you almost think about it from the perspective of the company trying to maximize your productivity. While in a dynamic learning environment, it's the workers themselves that are trying to raise their productivity, because if you can raise that productivity by a lot, you can use the time for better work-life balance, management issues, as well as investing in human capital, investing in growth of the people, and so on. So I want to talk a little bit about that. And the reason I'm so excited about that is that we need that to measure productivity of people in the Global Forecasting School, because it's quite high. Like it's amazingly high. The production team at the Central Bank of Armenia is composed of six people, and so the design of the framework has been basically influenced to a large extent by my experience helping central banks through IMF technical assistance over the years. And the difference in the design of FPAS Mark II is, of course, much more emphasis on uncertainty and nonlinearities, but I would say generally much more emphasis on economics, and so a good example of that is the way that we think about inflation, okay, which I'm going to talk a little bit about here. And so the actual talk that I'm going to give is about how to think about doing current analysis, and I'm going to be covering inflation data, wage data, thinking about productivity, unit labor costs, those kinds of issues. And I'm also going to cover how to think about GDP, how to think about aggregate demand and aggregate supply for goods and services, and how to think about the labor market. The GFS students have to spend up to what we call point 2, point 4, and point 6, focusing exclusively on US data. And I will try to explain why that's the case. Now, okay, so in the Global Forecasting School, we're developing this computer system that effectively allows us to measure productivity. Okay, now how do you achieve very high levels of productivity? First thing is you don't separate current analysis from modeling, and from projections. And so the people on the six person team, they have to know all that stuff. And doing that is obviously motivated by the fact that to do FPAS Mark 1 and Mark 2, okay, efficiently, you need to think about where is the economy today, what are the underlying forces driving the economy, and lastly, what do we need to do with our instruments to achieve our objectives? If you do that, and you think about all those three things together, that will increase your efficiency massively as an economist. And of course, six people that think that way in a very organized way are capable of doing all the analysis that you need to do on an economy. Okay. If they, of course, have spent months developing the human capital to do that, as well as the analytical tools to do that. So the framework that we have is in the steady state. We have 4 6-person teams, and each one of those teams will only have to do the quarterly projection once per year. Okay, so that means that in each quarterly projection exercise is very intense. It's done over a 28-day cycle. We're right in the middle of one at the Central Bank of Armenia, and each one of those quarterly cycles, we have to spend 1 week at, where everybody knows in advance. Okay, we have to spend 1 week at basically focusing on getting our case A and our case B scenarios. And this weekend actually was the weekend that I worked with the production team, and was, of course, very impressed. We also are drafting the monetary policy report at the same time, same 6-person team. And I think when people read it on the outside, they're going to find it very refreshing. Just to give you an example of the advantages of the prudent risk management approach to monetary policy, we have today wonderful examples where it's so much more interesting to think of case A and case B scenarios than to think in terms of a baseline. Really good example now is like China. And so we looked at various monetary policy reports as China was unfolding, and asked, what are they writing? What can they say when they don't have an FPAS framework? And what do they say when they have an FPAS Mark 1 framework? So I think when you look at the drafting of the monetary policy report, you're going to find it quite refreshing. Okay, so 6-person teams. We also, in the development of the human capital to support this, we use this thing called the Honey-Mumford tests. And so if people aren't familiar with the Honey-Mumford test, it's about learning styles. And so the learning styles that they focus on, which they can, I've never seen this test really fail ever. You basically ask person a bunch of questions. It's on the internet. Just go Honey-Mumford test, and you basically blast through all these questions. And what it tells you after about a half an hour of doing this, or less, is what your learning style is. And so the 4 types of learning styles are, you just to remember them, think of the word trap, for theorist, the T, R, reflectionist, A for activist, jumper, and P for pragmatist. Okay, so just to give you a brief kind of idea about what these things are. So people are made up of, they have kind of natural learning styles that they been using for years and years and years. And it's very important when you think about putting teams together to make sure that you have all the learning styles covered. Okay, so that's kind of insight number one. Insight number two is that when people have particular learning styles, they end up being incredibly biased and so on. So, for example, in international organizations like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and places like that, it's full of theorists, reflectionists, and theorist reflectionists tend to hire theorist reflectionists. So, and that's a bit of a problem because when you have organizations that are full of theorist reflectionists and you don't have enough activist jumpers or pragmatists, then it's hard to get the job done. Well, started with the activist and jumper and done with the pragmatist and so on. So this is very, very important to actually understand other people on your team. What kind of natural learning style do they have? And one of the reasons actually is that it helps to break the ice. Okay, so just talking in terms of different learning styles, sometimes, for example, the activist jumpers can drive the theorists and reflectionists absolutely crazy. I'm an activist jumper. When we look at all the at basically all the learning styles of people, there's a big shortage of activist jumpers. So we have some of them, but that's what we're short in, and of course pragmatists. And you might say, why are we short of pragmatists nowadays? And there's really interesting questions about trends in people's learning styles. But to do economics, to be involved in policymaking institutions, it's really a good idea to have a combination of different learning styles. I know, for example, um, several people that were very prolific teams in the economics literature, and it's because they were people that, in some cases, they would have like the theorist reflectionists that would be focusing on the writing and making everything intelligible and linear and so on. And then, of course, you'd have the activist jumper that would be generating ideas and excitement and that sort of stuff. You put those two people together, and you're likely to get a very dynamic team. Okay, so the other thing about this, and this is really interesting, is that once you understand that people do have different learning styles, and the team itself looks at what they're missing. So let's suppose that they're missing pragmatists or one of these activist jumpers. Well, the other ones, once they understand the concepts, they realize that they have to step up and play that role. So we don't mean to imply. In fact, what we've observed is that people can adapt. Okay, that once they understand how a highly functioning group operates and sets the standards for really high levels of productivity. And once people realize that that's partly because of different learning styles, then they understand the concept, and then they adjust and try to modify their behavior, particularly managers whose job it is to do that. There are other things as well that are more basic. So, for example, on the six-person production team right now, we have a natural-born writer. He's on the screen, as well as somebody that is amazing at critical thinking and presenting and synthesizing and so on. And she's on the bottom right-hand part of the screen now. So it's Angela, who was the first student at the Global Forecasting School to achieve level one, and her husband, Vahe, who was the second person to achieve level one. There's another level one on the screen, HICAS, who's in the middle at the bottom. He's not really that young. I think that's an old picture, and he manages the research that we do. Now, I like to one of the secrets for this higher productivity, you might say, is that your output is equal to your age. And in this case, I specifically mean a formula. And so our production function at the moment, since most of the students are from Armenia and Georgia, is that your output is equal to Armenians, how many Armenians you have, times Georgians. And then what is the E? And the answer is experience. And so we have a wonderful, amazing collection of some of the, I think, brightest and experienced economists in the profession. We have, for example, Yanis Halakias. He's on the right-hand side. He spent a good part of last summer at the Diligent Training and Research Center with me, talking about the development of the prudent risk management approach, and spent time with the students, HICAS in particular, trying to hone his economic and communication skills. Yanis is very special. He is the only person on this planet that is studied under both Franco Modigliani and James Tobin. And so having Yanis help the students learn from the great macroeconomists of our times, first, with firsthand kind of stories and so on. I think I think that's the way that you should learn economics. It's basically just, in some sense, an application of the great economists' ideas, and what our job is to maybe extend those ideas, but principally to learn them in the first instance. We also have Hamid Farouque, both Yanis and Hamid. All these guys are ex IMF guys, but Hamid Farouque worked with me, came out of Princeton, and we did a lot of work on developing the foundations for basically our dynamic stochastic general equilibrium models in the research department of the IMF. So I'm referring to models like multimod, okay, which was based on this extended overlapping generations framework that was developed by Olivier Blanchard in his 1985 JPE paper, and we later extended it to put in life cycle income profiles. I mean, he's going to be talking this week in a seminar on Thursday about how to think about adding age-specific mortality, okay, but in a macro framework, okay, that is nice and tractable for putting in a large-scale macro model. So this could be like a multi-country kind of model to look at issues that, for example, Olivier Blanchard has been talking about, which are, what are the implications of increases in things like life expectancy on the global real interest rate, questions that are very, very important, but ones where it requires a big investment in developing those kinds of analytical frameworks to think about those things. So I worked for years at the IMF running the economic modeling division, working on those kinds of issues, and now I'm free to spend more time thinking about that than managing the surveillance activities that we were involved in when I was still working at the IMF. So we have Hamid, who is the senior advisors at the Better Policy Project, along with Giannis. We also have Robert Ford, who's the handsome-looking gentleman at the bottom on the left-hand side. Bob basically was my mentor, one of my several mentors, but I would say one of the principal mentors that invested in me and helped me learn how to be a good economist. Bob was a legend at both the International Monetary Fund and the and the OECD. He was a master writer. Okay, uh, so Vahe is a natural born writer that is arguably as good or as good as anyone I've seen it, during my tenure at the IMF. So we've got a great writer, we've got a great communicator, Angela, who basically helped us develop the communication framework in under FPAS Mark II. Now we did have help also from Larry Shembri, who also spent time with us last summer working with the board, developing the communication framework. So we have experience. Okay, so output is equal to age. Armenians, Georgians, and experience. How much output? Anywhere between 2 and 10 times for simple activities that I think that you can measure. Okay, but maybe even more than that. That depends on how much you value things like financial stability or good monetary policy and so on. So, of course, that is a judgment, a value judgment, that how do you value trying to be the best of the best to avoid the economy from entering dark corners and with financial stability or allowing inflation to ratchet up and so on. So I just wanted to say that you guys are going to find this really fun. Uh, this this website that we're creating to basically measure the productivity of the students, and so on. So what am I doing today? Well, we're just going to look at uh, some data for the United States, and I'm going to focus on just inflation data to begin with. Now, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about what kind of standards we expect the students to have when it comes to doing current analysis and how do they think about the data. And so let's talk about one of the very first indicators that we're going to talk about, which is this thing called sticky price inflation. Okay. Now, we've got a working paper that was put out by the Central Bank of Armenia, where instead of having sticky price inflation, we have non-traded sticky price inflation. And the arguments for that distinction of non-traded sticky price inflation really goes back to people like Rudy Dornbush, who in the 1970s wrote down this little model with this idea that there's stickiness in things like wages and prices. And this gives rise to why you want to have a flexible exchange rate. So you want to allow flexible prices like the exchange rate to adjust to facilitate resource allocation in your economy. So if you thought about it in terms of macroeconomic resource allocation, you'd want the real exchange rate, of course, to depreciate when your economy is weak, okay? Because that's a very important part of the monetary transmission mechanism. So, and under FPAS Mark 1 or FPAS Mark 2, where we think in terms of those three essential ingredients. Where is the economy today? What are the underlying forces? And of course, importantly, what do we need to do with our instruments to achieve our objectives? The expected path of the interest rate features very prominently. And of course, it's that expected path of the policy rate that influences longer term interest rates that are relevant for households and for businesses. So I'm referring to things like uh, the rates of that households have to pay on mortgages or consumer loans or credit card rates and so on. So there's a maturity structure of the debt that one has to look at. And so the Atlanta Fed, I should all this data are going to be from the Atlanta Fed. You're going to think that I'm a salesperson of the Atlanta Fed, and I am uh, because because I like to give credit where credit is due. What they do to a large extent makes my job at the Global Forecasting School much easier, as you're going to see, because of their focus on on the tools and the data that they put out. So so back to Rudy Dordbush. Obviously, Rudy Dordbush taught us that we have to separate between traded goods prices and non-traded prices, and we have to separate between sticky prices and flexible prices if we're truly going to understand the monetary transmission mechanism of an open economy. Now, one can think of Oswald and Rogoff, New Open Economy Macro. So we teach all that stuff to our students. That, of course, helps us to think about how we organize data, including measures of inflation. Okay, so let me tell the story here. There is the Global Forecasting School students make videos. And so you can see a video by Archum, actually one of our summer interns last year, who talked about sticky prices and flexible prices, as well as wages. So very similar story to what I'm going to tell you right here. He was preparing comments on Ben Bernanke and Olivier Blanchard's work on inflation, which featured headline inflation as well as um, the employment cost index. We are going to talk a little bit about those two indicators, but if you want to get into the details, you go back and listen to Archum's video. Okay, so why do we? So we don't like to think of throwing anything out of the CPI. What we want to do is to decompose the CPI into two components: non-traded sticky prices and flexible prices. And when you do that, so in this particular case, I'm going to look at the Atlanta Fed website. They only separate between sticky prices and flexible prices. So the very first thing I'll say is that the word sticky might not be the best terminology. So anybody that can think of a better word than sticky, let us know. We'll give them the appropriate reward. What we mean by this, and what the Atlanta Fed means by this, is prices that are typically set infrequently. Okay, and so that turns out to be quite insightful. So in our research so far, where we've gone through a few countries and we've done this separation, again, we go a step further because we go non-traded and non-traded sticky prices and all other prices. Turns out it's actually quite easy to do that uh, from the behavior of these prices, and that I think is actually quite insightful that we're finding this. But for the following reason, prices that are typically set infrequently, if you're in a world that is inflationary, okay, then it's almost tautological that flexible prices will lead prices that are set infrequently because uh, uh, by the very definition, prices that are set infrequently are fixed. So the prices of your rental accommodations in many, many, many countries, they follow this convention that it is a contract that lasts a year. Now, of course, when you have lots of inflation and so on, there can be indexation and there can be an auction market and there can be all kinds of things. But there is this rigidity in prices that are set infrequently that is remarkably stable. So I think when you look at data, as I've looked at, you would say that the Lucas critique is certainly valid. That when monetary policy regimes are as unstable as Turkey, that you observe less prices set infrequently. In other words, you just fall too far behind if you don't raise your price in an inflationary environment. So non-trade is sticky price inflation in an inflation environment after you observe flexible prices rising. And so if it is a situation of generalized excess demand and supply conditions, so now I'm referring to, for example, 2021. So I'm just going to we're going to look initially at year on year. Okay. And again, I'm not worrying about the non-traded. We actually throw them out. You can get our data from us on non-traded sticky prices. We're about to download it on Fred and to update it every time that the CPI is released and so on. But right now, again, we're just looking at flexible and sticky prices, and you can see that you can just see visually, and actually you can maybe see it a little bit better if one looks at the data going back even longer. Let's see if I can do that. Yeah, so there's these wonderful bars that allow you to basically look at the data over long periods of time. And we're going to have something very similar in our on our website, except instead of just looking at data historically, you'll be able to construct projections of the future. So you'll be able to extend these graphs into the future with your various scenarios and the various models in the library of macro models that we're developing. But you can just look at this graph visually, and you can see that virtually in most periods where sticky price inflation has either risen or fallen, that flexible price inflation leads it. Okay. Now, there might be actually an example in the late 60s. Unfortunately, we don't have data in this chart where there was actually a wage price uh, where wages started the process. So there was a period back then where there was an increase in unionized activity, effectively an increase in labor share of about 2 percentage points. So, and when one looks at the details of that period, you can certainly make the cases that wages were leading, but that doesn't negate this basic idea that in most of the time you don't want to think about throwing things out of the CPI. That is a really bad idea. What you want to do is think about taking the CPI, decomposing it into flexible and prices that are set infrequently, like the Atlanta Fed does. And then you want to be really, you want to watch those flexible prices just as much as you watch the sticky prices, because if you're in a generalized state of excess demand conditions like we were in the 1970s and like we were during COVID, you can see that flexible prices obviously are going to lead. Now, of course, you face a signal extraction problem because when one looks at what flexible prices are, they're set in markets based on the laws of demand and supply, and they're moving around. So there's a lot of idiosyncratic things in flexible prices, but you don't want to be throwing them out based on some crazy statistical metric. You want to be thinking about the economics of what's driving flexible prices in those markets, and you want to think about the economics about what's driving prices that are set infrequently. You want to try and understand that if you're truly going to understand what is going on. Now, if you do that, then you might be somebody like me and Larry Summers, I might add, okay, that are very worried about whether or not the fight for low inflation has been won. So, for example, if you look at other indicators like headline inflation or PCE, excluding food and energy, it hasn't been too far away from the 2% target. But if one looks at these kinds of measures of inflation, one would say that we should be very worried about whether or not inflation is going to decline anytime soon to 2%. So when one looks at these measures of inflation from sticky price inflation, one just doesn't see inflation anywhere near 2%. Now, one of the things that you should really look at, and this is wonderful because the Atlanta Fed has this wonderful dashboard. Now we're focusing on sticky price inflation, and we're looking at the 12-month or year-on-year measure of sticky price inflation, which is the smooth orange line, obviously, as well as the 3-month over 3-month measure. Now, conceptually, if I measure those things in logs as opposed to percent changes, then the year on year would simply just be an average of the month over month over the last year, or it would just be an average of the 3-month over 3 months today, lag 3 months, lag 6 months, and lag 9 months. So, and that's going to be approximately true, except there's some multiplication involved when we look at things like the percent change. But so one can look at this at these data and say, well, it was looking like the 3-month, it got down all the way to into the into 3% kind of number, but now it's gone back up to 4.8%. So inflation, according to this measure, this is what we're looking at is 64% of the CPI. So this isn't a small part of the CPI in the case of the United States. So on the basis of this information, I would say I don't know what people are talking about when they think that we've achieved a smooth landing. Now, okay, so looking at the 12-month over 12-month and looking at the 3-month over 3-month is obviously very important. But also on the website, you can look at the 3-month over 3-month and the month on month. And so you can see how much noise there is in the month on month estimate. So if I look at that metric and I look at either the 3-month or the year on year or the 12-month, I'm looking at inflation that is in the 4 to 5% range. 12-month is 4.6%, 2.5 percentage points above 2, and the 3-month over 3-month is actually a little bit north of that. It's 4.8%. So you'd say inflation on that metric is significantly above the 2% target. Now you might ask, okay, well, what about how much different is it on average, before COVID. And you can see the answer was about 2.5, right? So if one thinks in terms of the PCE, the target being expressed as 2%, so we could say we would normally expect this indicator of inflation to be a little bit higher, maybe by a half a percentage point if the PCE was at 2%. So I don't want to forget that these prices, the relative price of these things, rises over time because they're prices of things like services where productivity is typically hasn't been as strong for long periods of time. So the inflation rate is a little bit higher than the price of goods, for example. Okay, so but it's still at a number between 4 and 5% is still a lot higher than the 2% target. So we don't know what people are talking about. Now, what should we compare this with? What should be the next metric that we look at? And obviously wages. Now, our preferred measure of wages, again, is the Atlanta Fed, where they have a measure of the 3-month moving average. Okay, this one here is the 12-month moving average. Now, obviously, that moving average is to deal with noise in the series. Okay, now these data are really interesting. Here, I'm looking at the median wage by different wage quartiles, and so when one looks at this during the period of COVID, one can clearly see the increase in the reservation wage of the lowest quartile. So these are, people that worked in restaurants and the service sector, and as you can see, they got big wage increases. So this is this green line, and so you can see that when you were watching on TV that the fast food chains were giving people 20% these gigantic signing bonuses and so on. There were actually wage increases as well in that group. So I think it's pretty common sense that there was an increase in the reservation wage. Now, what's interesting, and this would be the story in any inflation. I mean, I can't think of any inflation any country experienced over time and across countries that would be consistent with this story. That what inflation is that some group gets initially has to start somewhere, but some group gets higher wages, and then the question is, if the inflation continues, then the next group bids for a higher price as well because their prices have fallen behind the first group. And so it's interesting that when one looks at these data, the second quartile, the orange, you can see basically just lagged the first quartile. So then the question is, if you have like a ongoing wage price spiral, you would then have the third and fourth quartile now asking for their share as well. Okay, so that's kind of the story that is in these wage data. You can see that when one looks at the actual magnitudes. By the way, one can look at other data that they have on their website as well. But when one looks at the aggregate measure of unweighted median wage changes, it lines up amazingly well with this non-traded sticky price inflation measure. And so that to me tells me that this thing has an inflation premium. So rather than trying to infer inflation expectations from surveys, which I'm very negative about, I think that central banks are placing way too much emphasis on these survey measures right now that they incorporate major biases. So rather than do that, a much better thing is to look at measures of prices and wages that should embody inflation premium. In other words, should embody expectations of what where people think inflation is going to go in the future. And so when one looks at that, again, when one looks at sticky price inflation, one would say it's between 4 and 5%. If one looks at wages, I would say that according to this measure, uh, you would say it's a bit lower than that. Okay, in the sense that wage growth is also in the 5 to 6% range. And there, of course, we want to introduce the idea of unit labor costs. Okay, so when we compare wages and prices, we want to ask, are these increases in wages inflationary? Because there's also productivity growth, and productivity growth, labor productivity growth is probably picked up a bit. That might be related to artificial intelligence and ChatGPT. So we should start to see some of those measures show up in productivity. So they're significant enough that we should start to see that. So we've revised up our estimates of potential GDP growth from about 1.7, 1.8. So we used to have similar estimates as the Congressional Budget Office, but we revised up to 2% now. So if you think that about half of that is labor productivity, and you saw so unit labor costs growth are going to be equal to wage growth minus productivity growth. So that's just a definition. And so if one were to think of trend productivity growth, labor productivity growth as being in the 1 to 1.5% range, with wage growth in the 5 to 6% range, that would put inflation pressures from the labor market at around 4%, 4 to 4.5% in that kind of range. So either one, whether or not you look at sticky price inflation or you look at wages, they're both significantly higher. Now, when one looks at both those measures, as I said, if you look in our paper on non-traded sticky prices, we have another one out for Georgia that it tells remarkably the same story as Armenia, that it shows the value of this non-traded sticky price inflation concept for understanding inflation, even in economies that have a history of dollarization and so on. So you can see the value of these series, both in advanced economies and lower income and more vulnerable emerging market economies. So when we look at these data, what we see is again guided by the economic insights of Rudy Dornbush and Maury Upsult and Ken Rogoff about how to think about measuring these things in open economies, non-traded sticky price inflation. That we have a far less sanguine view about whether or not the Fed and other central banks have achieved a smooth landing. We believe that the interest rates that are priced into financial markets right now, again, we can look at the Atlanta Fed data on that because they provide some very nice estimates of the expected 3-month Fed funds rate. And you can see that financial markets are pricing in a significant decline in policy rates this year and next year through the year. And so the question is, are they underpricing the risks of higher interest rates? And we think that that certainly is the case. That it might actually turn out that they might have to raise interest rates if our story ends up being right, and if these flexible prices also turn north. Okay, so the thing about flexible prices is they're unpredictable in both directions. And so, in an environment where sticky price inflation is significantly above the target, there are very good reasons for expecting nonlinearities. Some wonderful work. Don Coletti, an advisor of the at the Bank of Canada, gave a very nice talk at the January 11th, 12th symposium, where we launched the prudent risk management approach to monetary policy in Armenia. And in his talk, he was referring to some nice work uh, by by Martin Harding, uh, who is a brilliant young economist at the Bank of Canada, that basically wrote this paper on one of the stories behind convex Phillips curves, and why in an inflationary environment firms will are more likely to raise prices, and so this means that that if we were to have flexible prices turn north in an environment where we already have sticky price inflation in the 4 to 5% range, then we might have firms raising prices faster than if prices decline, if they're if they were to toward south, and so on. So in other words, there might be a built-in asymmetry in the inflation process, which seems true for most countries that have significant inflationary kind of episodes that are a result of expansionary, excessively expansionary monetary and fiscal policies. So one of the key things that we really try to emphasize is to really understand the concepts. You have to understand more than the name of the variable that you throw into a regression. That it's absolutely vital to understand the concepts of inflation and different measures that you're using to understand what is going on in the economy. Now, I was hoping to get all the way through to GDP, but unfortunately, I think I'm going to leave that for the next lecture and call it a night and go and enjoy my dinner. So anyway, stay tuned. This week we're going to be testing the students. Uh, they have to go through the data for the United States and then look at what relevant data they have for the countries that they've chosen. So each GFS student now has to choose a country. So the countries that they've chosen include 5 non-FPAS central banks and 5 FPAS central banks. And again, what is an FPAS central bank? It's a central bank that organizes their surveillance and their policy making using a forward-looking framework where they think about where is the economy today, what are the underlying forces that are driving the economy, and lastly, the distinguishing one is what do I need to do with my interest, with my instruments to achieve my objectives. And importantly, they recognize that 30, 40 years ago, that was setting the policy rate. And that's not what it is about in modern monetary frameworks. It's all about doing that and using that as an opportunity to explain monetary policy with a state-of-the-art monetary policy framework or monetary policy report that explains how the central bank is trying to nudge market interest rates up or down and in a way that's consistent with how the central bank is thinking about monetary policy. So, in a nutshell, that's about reducing the informational asymmetry where the central bank might know something about its framework. Okay. And that might give it an advantage over people in the market because people in the market might not be totally aware of what the actual monetary policy framework is. So for those central banks that believe in transparency, they believe in developing forecasting and policy analysis systems, and the central banks that we're referring to, it took somewhere between 2 and 3 years to develop those frameworks. So the FPAS central banks that we're going to be considering are the Bank of Canada, which was the very first one where we developed this framework, the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, which was the second central bank in the world that developed that FPAS framework. The Czech National Bank is the third one. The fourth one is the Bank of Israel. And we're going to focus on Israel. One reason is they have these wonderful data from indexed bond markets that allow us to tell stories about what is actually happening with inflation expectations and so on. And so the non-FPAS central banks are the Bank of England, the Fed, which we've been using as a laboratory in the development of FPAS Mark II. So we've been heavily evaluating FPAS Mark II frameworks using the US data. So we've been publishing before each FOMC meeting a working paper called Not the Teal Book, where we basically use the US data to evaluate what a prudent risk management approach to monetary policy might look like there. The other non-FPAS central banks are that we're looking at is the ECB. Okay, so we have the Bank of England, the Fed, the ECB, the Bank of Brazil, and then lastly, and more recently, the Reserve Bank of Australia. And we'll be extending that list to the Bank of Japan will be the next one that we add on in terms of non-FPAS central banks. So that's what we're doing. We talk about those things we have now a central bank watchers seminar series that happens every Tuesdays and Thursdays. The first one next week on Tuesday is we refer to as the Charles Goodhart Hour. It's going to be the launch of the Charles Goodhart Hour, and in that seminar, we're going to talk about a topic that is very close to Charles' interests. What are the implications of an aging population and so on? And so we're gonna talk a little bit of some recent research we've been doing, looking at the aging problem in Japan, and asking what policy options do countries like Japan have in terms of using foreign workers to deal with the issue of their declining working age population and so on, and as well as looking at the whole issue of can we use robots? Uh, uh, will robots help them deal with the issues of a declining working age population? How should they think about investment? Obviously, with a decline in the working age population, one possibility is to take the massive capital that they've saved over the last few decades and to think about investing it in foreign countries, and instead of trying to produce the output in Japan, they can try to produce the output in a foreign country using labor maybe that is much more abundantly available than in these countries that have declining working age populations and so on. And again, we'll finish the week out on Thursday where Hamid Faruqi is going to take us through some of the foundational building blocks that we'll be incorporating into our DSG models. But we'll also be talking about the Global Forecasting School students. We'll be talking about these countries that I just mentioned, these central banks that they follow now, and use the types of tools and analytical framework that we've developed for FPAS Mark II and apply them to those countries. So specifically, what we're going to be doing and what those students are doing is writing working papers that basically ask the question posed by Larry Summers when he provided comments on FPAS Mark II about a year ago. And his comments was basically just to go back and to think of the counterfactual, like what if we would have had FPAS Mark II at some point in the past? What are the potential benefits of that? Okay, so the Global Forecasting School will be talking about that in reference to all these countries that I mentioned. What insights have we learned about FPAS Mark II that could be applicable in these countries in terms of promoting economic and financial literacy and economic and financial stability? So I'll leave it there. Thank you for your patience. See you tomorrow.